Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce my good friend, Estelle O'Callaghan, to help us hold on to our inspiration, build big ideas, and make projects really deliver. Estelle is an alum of Goodenough College who lived in London House from 1999 to 2000 and is currently chair of the Melbourne Goodenough Alumni Group. Estelle studied music in London and holds a Bachelor of Music, a Master of Arts, an Executive Master of Public Administration, all from the University of Melbourne. She is also a certified personal and business coach, a certified facilitator, and graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and the Churchill Fellow. Estelle is passionate about supporting positive social change by turning big ideas into projects that deliver. She has had over 25 years experience in the social purpose field, and with 3 careers spanning music education, public administration, and coach consulting, she's seen how specialist project management skills that are tailored to the social purpose sector's needs can drive consistent and sustainable project success. She's supported teams to turn around projects that have drifted off course or fallen apart. Estelle used the 2020 COVID lockdown to develop a project management method, the GANVI method, that is designed specifically for the social purpose sector. She wrote a book about the GANVI method called Rock Your Rollout, which was launched nationally in Australia in collaboration with the Winston Churchill Trust in September. She also developed a series of on-demand resources that social purpose professionals can access quickly and affordably to ensure they make the difference they desire. And have a look in the chat for a link. Now, before I hand over to Estelle, a couple of housekeeping rules. Please keep yourself on mute unless taking a question to minimize feedback and external noise. I know many of you will be looking forward to asking your own questions. When the Q&A is opened, we encourage you to please raise your hand, either physically or in the Zoom reactions tab. Melissa and I will be watching out to select you. Now I'd like to formally welcome Estelle and invite her to the proverbial floor. Welcome, Estelle.
Thank you so much, Jane. That is the most flattering introduction I have ever experienced, and I even feel like I have a lot to live up to now. So that's just wonderful. And yes, Goodenough College is a very special place for me too. I was only there for a very short time, and it was actually music that took me there. I was on a Churchill Fellowship at the time, and specialising, in fact, in oratorio and cantata styles of singing. So that was very exciting. My day-to-day, I live in Melbourne, Australia, and as you said, I am very passionate about creating positive social change, and that did take me on to 3 different career paths. And the reason why I set up my own business really in creating positive social change is because I wanted to do it in a way that really worked. I'd spent about 15 years in social policy and government, which was very exciting and very dynamic. And we did make some progress, but I just wanted to do it in a different way that really made a difference. So this is why I specialise in a niche area I call social purpose project management. And what that means is these days, yes, I do go in and support teams who are rolling out various types of strategic initiatives or reform programs or grants programs, other special projects, and they've just lost their way a bit. They've become stuck, they've drifted off purpose. And what I do is help them get back on track, basically, and so they can then point themselves towards that goal achievement. And I've always worked with a philosophy of supporting the team to lift their capability so they understand the red flags to look out for, and then they can be confident and competent as they move forward with their projects.
Fantastic, Estelle. Congratulations on releasing your first book this year called Rock Your Rollout. What a great title. I really love it. Now, can you tell us briefly how you went about it, Estelle?
Oh, thank you, Jane. Yes, I'm very excited that I finally put pen to paper and managed to take it all the way through to a release and a national launch, which was very exciting. And yes, I quite like the title too. And that actually came from a client. who was using parts of my method and said to me, "Oh, Estelle," when I checked in on them 3 months later, she said, "Oh, we've caught up and we're rocking our rollout." And I thought, oh, bing, great idea for a title. But really the idea started back in about 2017. And what I was noticing from projects that I was working on, they had some very common characteristics. They're very smart people, generally extremely well educated, well motivated, working really hard, and yet their projects were experiencing difficulties. And they were making very common mistakes, really almost identical mistakes. It was almost like these teams had gone and learnt a course in how to make these mistakes because they were so common. And they generally would start from scratch every time. There was no consistent approach, and it very much depended on the person who was running the team about how far they would get down the line. So if they didn't have someone who was experienced, really they weren't giving themselves much of a chance at all. And at the time, I just couldn't find any courses or books that I could guide my clients with, because all the courses, traditional project management courses, were designed for infrastructure and technology, and it was so frustrating. So in 2017, I took a trip to the UK because they've got some interesting programs over there, and went to the LSE and Treasury and county governments and charities. 2018, I did a lot of research over here in Australia, and with Royal Commission findings and reviews of projects that didn't work. And in 2019, I interviewed over 50 executives from across the government sector and the charity sector to find out what their pain points were and to test these concepts. And then in 2020, well, of course, we all know what happened. I was actually working with a lot of government projects that immediately stopped and went into abeyance, and the staff were repurposed to pandemic response very appropriately. But that meant I had a lot of time on my hands. So I thought, right, time to write the book. So I spent some time really trying to nut out a framework, an adaptive framework that would have an appropriate level of structure and yet incorporate enough flexibility to work with the sorts of projects this sector works with. And then I hired a book coach, Catherine Mora of Change Empire Books, and together we worked through putting this book together. And really there's a whole team of people. There are beta readers, there are editors, there's my family, broader family, who gave me the time and space to write this. So there's a lot of people to thank, even though my name is actually on the cover. But, and look, really, I didn't want to write an academic book. I didn't want to write a traditional project management book either. So this book is really about my experience. It has examples from the field. It has activities for teams to try. It's very practical. It's in plain English, and it's just a little bit cheeky as well. So, you know, and the vision always was to have a book and a complementary set of digital resources, because that's, you know, the direction we're all going in. And so I developed a set of learning modules and masterclasses and downloadable resources that I put in what I call the Ganvi Digital Library. And so it was actually a very busy time for me. The lockdown, in many senses, the longest lockdown in the world, has been quite advantageous to me, because I couldn't go anywhere, I couldn't get distracted. I just had to sit down and jolly well write it all. So yeah, no Netflix for me. I was just sitting at my desk, chained to my desk.
Well done, Estelle. I think you've used the COVID time very effectively and efficiently in writing this book. It's amazing. Now, the book outlines a project management method you've developed especially for the social purpose sector. I'm wondering why the social purpose sector needs its own method.
Well, Jane, that's a really good question. And I get asked this quite a few times when I go to talk at different places. And really, the sector needs its own method and framework because it's dealing with vulnerable people. And the environment can change quickly and unpredictably, and it can actually have quite catastrophic implications. And what I find is that most training for project management is designed, let's face it, by engineers for engineers. And, you know, the sort of services that this sector is rolling out are not bridges, not buildings, not software packages. It's about people and it's about services. So these traditional courses don't resonate as a package, right? So we need to adapt the package. We can learn from it and we can draw from traditional methods, but we can't adopt it as a package because it's just like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And when I did the interviews across the sector in 2019, I heard loud and clear that, you know, the people in the sector just don't belong. One example stood out for me enormously, and it was somebody in government, and they had sent staff on a traditional 2-day course, as you do. And this person reported back that 3 hours into a 2-day course, they realised they didn't belong because the examples were not examples of service, they were examples of infrastructure or technology. And so but they sat it out for 2 days, and then they came back to their desk and just did their own thing anyway and tried to work it out themselves. Now, to me, that's just not good enough. It really isn't. You know, to start with, it's a total waste of professional development dollars, which are quite precious, and investment in professional development. And secondly, just because that person happens to be from the social purpose sector, it means they don't have an opportunity to grow and develop in that dedicated way that they need to, so that they can lift their performance and in turn accelerate the outcomes and drive the positive social change that they're really looking to do. So it's a lose-lose for everybody. And, you know, these professionals are driving billions of dollars worth of projects every single year. And it is a specialty. So it does need its own form to sift through the types of projects it's rolling out.
And Estelle, what makes the Ganvi method you've developed for the social purpose sector so special?
Well, I'm glad you think it's special, Jane, because so do I. It's very close to my heart. I might be a bit biased there. But so what I've really done, what I spent my time doing, and this is what took the most time, is drilling down the project management theories, methodologies into a very, very simple and fit for purpose framework. So I've cleared out all the noise from project management. And what that does is bring a consistent approach to rolling out a project or a strategic initiative. So instead of starting from scratch and trying to wing it every time, if you use a consistent approach, then you're starting to buy into a virtuous cycle of continuous improvement, really, because you take the learnings from this project and you'll use the same consistent approach next time, and you take those learnings forward. So you're in this cycle of continuous improvement. And the reason why I've made it simple is not because the sector won't get it. They're very smart people. It's because the vast majority of projects simply don't need all this other gumph, right? So I've just simplified it enormously. So if I may, I'll just go over very briefly, I'll provide a broad outline of the method, my Ganvi method, just to show you how simple it actually is. So it's basically 3 key elements and 1 primary tool, and that's it. So the 3 key elements are life cycle phases. So clearly that's borrowed from mainstream project management. And in the Ganvi method, I start from the time when the project is funded, and I finish at the end of that funded period. And it follows the journey of the typical project, and I use 5 life cycle phases. So I use number 1, post-budget planning, which is really setting a strong foundation for the project journey. Then I go into phase 2, which is pre-start. And this is a phase that's a lot of fiddly business to set up a strong start. And that's often where projects actually go wrong. And for start, that means opening the doors on day 1, whatever day 1 is for your particular initiative. And it's about keeping your eyes and ears open to make sure everything's working well. And if it's not working like it's supposed to work, well, go change it. You know, don't just bury your head in the sand. It's about finding it fast and fixing it. Then you've got a little bit of time to breathe in the number 4 phase, which is called cruise. And that's about managing, monitoring, supporting and reporting. And you still have to have your eyes and ears open, but that's really your main delivery at that point. And then the final phase is about wind up or reinvestment, because there are very particular choices and decisions and actions you need to take if you're going one way or the other. So that's the life cycle phases. And what happens in that life cycle phases is that you are then learning to prioritise your actions in chunks of time going forward, because even though these are very standard, they're not new life cycle phases, but in the social sector, they actually are. A lot of people in the sector don't realise that pretty much every project follows a typical journey. So it's teaching and you learn about the typical journey, you're prioritising over time, and what you're doing is you're starting to filter your actions, your headline actions. So what I mean by a headline action is to say you're redeveloping an intake assessment form for clients. Well, that's your headline action, because sitting underneath of that, you've got 20 other smaller activities. But your headline action would be just to redevelop that intake assessment form. So say you've got 100 of these actions, these headline actions. Well, if you can separate them out across those 5 life cycle phases, you start to filter. It's a level 1 filter. So you prioritise the actions you need to take now, and you've also got a view about the actions you're looking to do in the next phase. So you can look forward and you can start to take a little bit of proactive control of that project. So really that's the reason why I included life cycle phases, because it is a level of filter. So that's key element number 1. Key element number 2 is about what I call activity domains. These are 6 themed areas that all the research tell us need to be managed really well and monitored effectively for a project to perform well. And they are governance, financial management, stakeholder engagement and communication, capability management, risk management, and of course, outcomes and benefits management. And the way I use them in the Ganby method is as a level 2 filter. Because if you say, take your tasks from your life cycle phases, so you had 100 tasks, you separated them into those phases, then you had 20 in each phase. Now you take a phase, so with phase 1, you've got 20 headline tasks. Now you separate those out across those 6 themes, and you've only got 3 or 4 in each theme. And it becomes a lot clearer, a lot faster, and you get a very holistic picture of your project almost instantaneously. And those activity domains do interact. So if you make a decision in one domain, it ripples across the other domains, and you can start to see the impact of the rippling. And, you know, it just, when you have that method that incorporates both levels of filtering, the time filter and the themed category filter, you set yourself up for making much better decisions, because you're having elevated conversations, you're having strategic conversations about your project. And really it starts to lift performance pretty much instantly. So the third element is critical friends. And this is a group of people who are familiar with your project or your area, but they're not working in the project, because we need, the point of critical friends is to be objective. And they help you to identify the sorts of problems that are undermining your project success, because anyone working in the project is too close. You can't see it anymore. And while, yes, I have dedicated training for critical friends in my Ganby Digital Library, but you can find them from all over the place. They might be board directors, they might be part of your executive. If you're in government, it might be a different branch or division or a different department. If you're in the community sector, it might be a partner organisation, or you know, some other people that you work with relatively frequently. And they are there really to support you to get the best out of your project and to help you transition from one life cycle phase to the next. That's a really important role for them. And you should be asking your critical friends at that time, are we up to date? Are we on track? You know, can we transition successfully? Because they're the sorts of times when you pick up little problems, when you start to drift a little bit that you haven't noticed you're drifting, and a critical friend can bring you back on board. So basically that's the 3 phases. That's the 3 key elements: life cycle phases, activity domains, and critical friends. And there's one primary tool, and I give it a very silly name, and I call it the Ganby Magnificent Matrix. A very untraditional project management sort of name. And what that does is it brings together the two levels of filtering. So it brings together level 1 filtering with filters with life cycle phases, level 2 filters with the activity domains, and you've got it across in one page. And it's a multi-purpose tool where you can do mapping with it, planning and reporting. So it makes it very, very easy. And you've got your project on a page, and it really does elevate the types of conversations you're having. And elevating conversations is critical to project success. So that's it.
Well, that sounds absolutely fantastic, Estelle. Very innovative and creative, way of structuring a project. And I really like the sound of the life cycle phases. That's fabulous. Look, interested to hear, what are the most common mistakes that undermine project success?
Well, yes, after me saying there's so many common problems, that's a very good idea, because I'm sure some of our listeners will experience some of these. And the research tells us very, very commonly that number one is a lack of clarity around project purpose. That is such a big problem. And a lot of other problems that manifest, like that might seem to be about communication, might seem to be about outcomes and benefits, can be traced back to a lack of clarity with the project purpose. There's often confusion around what might be a defined project concept compared to a project that you can actually deliver. What I mean by a defined project concept is, say you're in government, it would be the policy, the government policy, and then teams try and take actions from there, and that's the project plan. Well, it's not. It's just a defined concept, and you have to do something different if you're going to roll out a project. Or if you're in the community sector, it might be a 10-year vision or a strategic vision, and teams try and roll that out, but it's not. It's not a project. So then they run into difficulties, of course. There's other reasons for this as well. I've come across a team who was way too terrified to make their project purpose clear, because they thought if they made it clear, they wouldn't succeed. And then if they didn't succeed, they'd never get funded. So they deliberately kept theirs very broad and warm and fuzzy. And I thought, well, that was a real indictment, because they're actually a well-educated, well-resourced organisation. And it was a real shame, because they just didn't have that trust in themselves and their own ability, and they could do it. They absolutely could do it. Also, look, this sector, we always try and please everyone. And if you try and please everyone, well, of course, you just make everybody unhappy. You're just really increasing your risk profile. If you don't have that clear project purpose, you're increasing your risk profile, you're causing confusion, and you're actually prompting little spot fires to come up all over the place. So I'd say that is number one. Number two would be project scoping. It's a very underdeveloped skill in the social purpose sector. What I mean by a project scope is really, there's no real boundary around this project, and so it starts to creep. And project scope creep is a massive problem in the social purpose sector. And it's really because the sector wants to do everything. They don't like to say no because they're emotionally committed. They like to overpromise because they feel that if they overpromise, they'll look more legitimate than if they just do a small project and offer a small project. But really, all it does is thin out the resources and burns out the staff. And you're left with a project you can't evaluate either. So it's a pretty meaningless project. You won't achieve anything. There's no goal to achieve. And because you haven't set out with the same parameters all the way through, you can't evaluate it. So then you've got nothing to show to a funder anyway. So that's a real problem, scope creep and developing a project scope. And finally, I'd say there's a really big disconnect between the why and the what in a project. If you think of a project like a triangle, and you've got why at the top and the what's down the bottom in the wide part of the triangle, there's a disconnect in the middle, and the what starts to get further and further away and drag further away from this purpose, the project purpose. And that happens because staff leap into action as soon as they get their budget, because they're already under time pressure. And there's a misconception that implementation is just about doing. And we don't have time to plan. That's out of date. No, we're doing something. And look, we've got this, and now what embeds the problems even more, we've got these software programs where we enter all of these tasks, these 1,001 tasks. Look, we're really, really busy. We must be doing the right thing, you know? And let me tell you right now, all the projects I've ever worked on did not fall over or run into difficulty because everyone was standing around telling jokes, you know? Everyone was really, really busy. They were flat out, but that did not equal doing the right thing. They were putting in actually the wrong sort of effort. And that's where the problem strikes, because the what's down the bottom of that triangle are the 1,001 activities. And they start to take on a life of their own and for their own sake. And all the conversations about the project start to circulate around these what factors. And the what's are not strategic. So you're not having any strategic conversations. And so the why bit, the purpose, becomes this really distant and broad sort of notion rather than a clear goal that you're really pointing yourself towards. And when the conversations are just circulating around at that what level, it all becomes about tugs of war, factions. You're really sweating the small stuff. And you start to enter quite a vicious cycle of overwork and overwhelm. Because if you're putting in this misplaced effort, little spot fires start to emerge. And because the sector is well-intentioned and well-motivated, okay, so you put in more effort to put the spot fires out. But because you're putting in more of the same effort, which is misdirected, you're just creating more spot fires and more problems. And then you put in more time to put those ones out. And then before you know it, this really starts to roll and grow and escalate. And before you know it, it's drop everything, quick, deal with this emergency, drop everything, deal with that emergency, drop everything, deal with something else. And there's just no forward progress. And by the time someone like me arrives, 12 months, 2 years later, the staff who started out excited that they were going to make a change, serve some vulnerable clients, make a real difference in their lives, are exhausted, frustrated, overwhelmed, and planning to leave. But they just can't take it anymore. So it's a total lose-lose. So they're the top three, really, Jane.
Wow, that's very insightful, Estelle. Now, given these sort of mistakes the sector is making, what do they need to turn around their performance and turn those big ideas into performance that delivers? Okay, so there are some really practical steps that individuals and teams can take to turn that performance around. And it's not all that hard, really, Jane. This is not rocket science, It actually just takes a commitment to replace bad behaviours with informed, really good behaviours and choices, right? So the very first thing that anyone needs to do, whether you're turning something around or whether you're starting, is to learn how to craft a really crystal clear purpose statement, project purpose statement. That's so important, and you do need to trust that you can drive it home, because you definitely can. Because when you've got the clear purpose statement, it drives allocation of resources, it drives your outcomes, it drives your key performance indicators, it makes things so much easier, it drives your communication with all your stakeholders. It makes it so much easier for funders and all your stakeholders to understand what are we all trying to achieve here, so that everyone then knows how to play their part and work with you, not against you. And where are we going to do it? And when are we going to get there? How will we know we've got there? How do we know when we've got to the finish line, and when do we get to the finish line? And I know that sounds really too simple, and people will be thinking, I didn't sit here and sign up for an hour just to find that out. But actually, when you look at projects and you look at organisations that succeed consistently, they get the fundamentals right. That's their secret. So you've got to get these fundamentals right. So I would be suggesting, when you're looking at developing your project purpose, ask yourself, firstly, what is the difference we're trying to make? What is actually going to be different
when we're successful compared to now? And which elements are going to be different? Are the staff going to be interacting with clients differently? Is the intake going to be different? Is the referral system going to be different? You know, whatever your project is, try and break down what are the different elements compared to what's happening now. And then try to bring your picture to life with a target, with a sense of geography about where you're going to do it and when you're going to finish, a timeline, and try to bring it all to life in 25 words or less. That would be my suggestion, because I have read purpose statements that are half a page and I still can't figure out what they're trying to achieve. So really 25 words or less, keep it pithy, nice pithy purpose. So with your scope, okay, this is that very underdeveloped area. And A, you have to understand that you do need to do it. And B, what it is essentially is building a picket fence around your project, right? Think of it like that, because that makes it a lot easier. And to build that picket fence around your project, you actually have to have conversations, right? You have to make choices. You have to make some quite disciplined, and a lot of people will find this quite emotionally draining, quite brutal choices about who and what's inside the fence and who and what's outside the fence, because you just can't do it all. You can't serve everyone, and you don't serve anyone well unless you do put that picket fence around, because if you put the fence around and you do this project really well, you'll take the learnings from it and then you'll be able to serve everybody else, you know? So their time will come, and you need to do that really, really well. You need to be very clear and honest about what you can and can't deliver based on the resources and capacity and capability you actually have on the ground. And when you're realistic, you know, funders will be a lot happier with you. So much happier. You'll be more happy. Your staff, all the staff and the teams start to take control again. The shoulders go down, and they feel, instead of feeling like a failure, they're actually looking at successful projects, and they're feeling great, and they're feeling inspired, and they're feeling very encouraged. So that's what I'd say for scope. And finally, about the disconnect between the how and between the why and the what. Well, that's where you put the how framework in the middle. And that's what the Gandhi method is all about, okay? So it's all about planning an adaptive delivery framework into the middle of that triangle. And that's so that you strategically align your delivery. You're connecting up the purpose of the project with the activities you're doing to make sure the activities you're doing are actually relevant to the project. And of course, I would say, you know, I would be biased and say, well, you should use the Gandhi method. But of course, that's not going to suit everybody. So you need to choose the adaptive method that works for you, and you need to be very confident that it has the appropriate level of structure and flexibility, and that it will really drive that performance and point you towards your goal. And what happens when you put that how piece in the middle is that you're starting to elevate your level of conversation and discussion, right? And you'll notice how conversations come up a lot as part of this masterclass, because conversations are so important. If they're still down at the what level, at the little task level, it all becomes about all the annoying things that happen. Oh, she didn't turn up, or you know, I did a better job on that, or you know, this person blocked my or sat on my sign off for 2 weeks, or you know, that meeting was cancelled. It becomes about all those little problematic things, and it's so not strategic. But when it's at the how level, it will be about, oh, how are we getting this stakeholder to help us achieve our goal? How can we help them help us? You know, it becomes so much more about pointing everyone and everything towards that goal achievement. And just to be really clear, the how piece is actually not program logic. A lot of people use program logic as a tool, and it's a great tool. I love program logic because it does elicit a lot of very valuable conversations about project purpose and inputs, outputs, and outcomes. But that's at the why level. It's at the top of the triangle, and it leaves you with a well-defined project concept, not a how. Okay, how you're going to deliver this. So you still need the how piece in the middle to connect up your project. And it's not an adaptive framework. The how piece is also not your content expert in the team. You still need a content expert. They're very valuable. Keep them. But this is about the whole team being project management literate, okay? So that you can harness all the intelligence on the ground. Your project team is the eyes and ears of your project. So it makes sense to make sure all of them understand how to have those strategic conversations and bring all of the intelligence that they can to pointing towards that goal. It really does. And so that's what I would say for that connection. You really need that how piece in the middle. You need to plan. And the planning these days, it happens all the way through. It's not just something you do at the beginning and leave, but the planning elements keep going all the way through. So you do need to learn those skills.
Well, Estelle, thank you so much for your very comprehensive, detailed and enlightening talk on the Ganvi method. It's very exciting and no doubt will be a game changer in successfully delivering on time and on budget social purpose projects that deliver better outcomes. So we've really enjoyed it today or tonight. Now I invite questions from the audience.